Hello, hello, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. It's good to see you here, Leia. It's good to see you, Victoria and Snowbat. Love to have you all here. As I said, hope everyone is doing well. I'm doing all right. We did a bunch of nerdy stuff today. So I've been building a bunch of tools to make it easier for us to set up workshops, which means like a bunch of, I don't know, I guess you can call it coding. I keep we'll switch over in just a sec. I keep referring to it as the substance designer of the internet that I'm currently using. So what that means, it's like a node-based interface where you can basically connect like a lot of apps on the internet together in some way. So that's what I've been doing the entire day, building our own tool set. No, it's not even coding. Even though I used to do a lot of coding, but a lot of coding. I am familiar with C, C++, Python. My god, I even did a bit of MaxScript back in the day. Let's see. I think my camera might die on me soon because I forgot to charge the battery, so we'll see where we land. But yeah. So that basically means that whenever we have like a new person from the workshop being announced, that we can automatically set up like a Discord event. It sets up everything on the website. It creates like placeholder Canva designs for us and all that kind of stuff where we can like go in and design it. So yeah, been really cool. I love playing around with that stuff. Also, this is something that I actually wanted to get back into for the longest time, but I didn't really have the time for it. I want to do proper community spotlights again. So what that means is that I want to capture people's submissions in like finished work, and then maybe even set up like a fun community vote or something like that, and the winner gets like showcased on social media or something like that, or maybe like everyone gets. I don't think we need to have a vote, but there's something there that I want to bring back because we used to have that for the longest time. And I do want to bring that back. I think that would be interesting to kind of like showcase more of what the awesome community is doing, because I feel like we have a lack of that, you know? Like, of course, everyone in the community sees what everyone's up to, but it's nice to broadcast it out to the world. I want to learn coding, especially Python, C++, and Vex. Oh yeah, I've not dived into Dini yet, so I have not had to touch Vex, but I've done my fair share of Python programming. And yeah, in uni we had to make like a couple of games in C++ and all that kind of stuff from scratch. So it's been a while, but it was really valuable to learn like the logic behind it, you know? Like it's almost like you learn like the basics of like a language or something like that, like an actual language. And then you can go from like, ooh, Python uses this syntax, but then this language uses this syntax. You can kind of just like, you know, like moving between them really quickly. Psycho Mantis, hello Tim, you absolute legend. Hello Psycho Mantis, good to see you. And then Hockey Zera saying, hey, hello. If you have any good resources to learn, please share. When it comes to C++ or anything like that, no, my stuff is like outdated when it comes to that. So I don't really have any like up and running resources for that stuff, I'm afraid. But yeah, I would actually love to show more of like the back end of what I'm doing. So that is like an idea that I'm playing around with in the future, where I might showcase like where I'm just building like some systems or some tools that we use in the back end of Beyond Extend, and how like how we do stuff in the background. I think that could be pretty interesting. Sergio was saying, how's it going? It's going good. Yeah, it's going good. Like I was just saying, I spent my entire day testing some new tools that I built. So Evelyn is now using those tools to help us speed up the whole workflow when it comes to setting up all the things that we need to set up for the workshops. I've been doing that. And yeah, honestly, the last week has been pretty monotonous in terms of it's just been straight up editing from when I wake up until I go to sleep. Because we want to get 4 new lessons added to the course, and they're all going to be about foliage. So I went through and had to edit 35 different videos, I think, which are now done for the most part. I need to go back and like polish some of them. But yeah, we got 35 like videos ranging from like a couple of minutes to like half an hour that we're gonna add to the website in the coming days, which is cool. And then of course we had our latest workshop that we had with you, which was really interesting, talking about Substrate. We had that released to the public. So we decided for this one that we were gonna do it slightly different. We were just gonna put it out there so that we could see, because it was more like a topic that was discussed a lot. So we kind of wanted to put it out there earlier, you know? So that's what we did with the workshop from Hugh on Substrate, which is really cool. So instead of doing like the normal early access and all that kind of stuff, we just decided to release to the public. Yeah. Leia was saying that one was so good. Yeah, thank you, Leia. Thank you. Yeah, I did enjoy it myself as well. It's one of those workshops where I kind of want to dive into stuff myself. And since I haven't been able to do that for like quite a long time, like those kind of make me itch, you know? Where like the new Substrate stuff is coming out. Or for example, there was an update today or yesterday talking about like the new updates coming to Blender, and they overhauled the entire UV system, which is like, ooh, I kind of want to give that a try, you know? So there's like more and more stuff in like my mental back catalog where I kind of want to dive into more stuff. 'Cause yeah, I felt like the last thing that I did was some PCG related stuff on my own scene, which was really cool, and then I just had to drop it for some other stuff. Yeah. Yeah, I would honestly love to keep more in touch with like more of the upcoming updates and see if I can, I don't know, live stream it a little bit more or something like that. Could be interesting in the future. We have to move first though. So a little bit less than 2 weeks before we move, and then we'll see. We'll see what the plans are. Chidoum is saying, I love your channel. Thanks for all the content you share with us. Oh, thank you so much. I mean, thank you also so much for the support, right? And this goes out for like everyone here currently. Thank you all so much. I feel like I don't say it as often as I need to, but thank you so much for, well, putting me in this position where we can actually put that stuff out there, right? And where I can fully focus on like putting these resources out there. And I can guarantee you that there's more to come. So keep an eye out. We got some. Evelyn has been crushing it on the workshop side. I feel like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing and Sunny are doing, we're just like in the background, like trying to set up for the future. Whereas like Evelyn currently hunting for people for the workshops, we got some like really cool guests coming up. We got people from we got people from Machine Games. We got some freelancers in there. We got we got some well-known people from the industry joining us. If not at the end of the year, in the new year. So I'm excited to see those announced as well. Hello, Justine. But yeah, going back, like there is a part of me that really wants to get back into the more creative stuff, though. I do wanna do more streams where I'm just working on stuff, like really experimenting with things. I think that could be really, really fun. And maybe try out some stuff to turn into like small tutorials or something like that. Because I had some fun with that a while back. But yeah, we will see. How's everyone else week been? Tell me what's been going on with everyone else. Because yeah, I'm slowly but surely also getting more up to date with like social media and stuff. It sounds weird, but I've been buried my head in the sand. So I'm kind of a bit more up to speed with what's happening there. For example, the new Blender updates, or even that apparently you can now, or that they're gonna build a system where you can release Unity games into Fortnite, which is interesting. I feel like is that sort of setting them up to, I don't know, in Fortnite? because I'm trying to anticipate what that's going to mean for the future, right? Because with Unreal Engine 6 or whatever they said, there were talks about that they want to merge Unreal Engine for Fortnite and the Unreal Engine for Fortnite and the engine closer together, right? And this is probably in anticipation of user-generated content, I'm assuming. But yeah. Can I buy the artworks you got on the right there? And Beyond Extend will send it to me. The artist related gets a percentage. No. No, these are not for sale. They are unfortunately not for sale. That could be potentially something to look into. Not a bad idea. But yeah. We currently do not do that now. Yeah, it's crazy what's happening out there. Like, it's weird to see like Unity and like Unreal Engine kind of collaborating this close together. Which is an interesting one. I still need to read like the full article and go through the news myself, but just seeing that headline made me like, think about it. Epic Games will buy Unity? Well, no, so this is the thing, right? So if they become the platform that a lot of people are going to be using to put their Unity games on, then there's no reason in them buying up Unity, right? Because I feel like what that is doing is that they are so secure in their position in the market that they're playing this role of like, hey, we're just gonna open the floodgates, right? And then whenever people want to make like mobile games or I don't know, games on other platforms, they can release it on our platform too, right? Like in other engines, I guess. I think it's just a play to kind of what we're seeing with, let's say, Microsoft in Game Pass, right? To me, it feels like a move to capture the majority of the market, and then, I don't know, we'll see what's going to happen. Maybe change it, right? But that's what it feels like to me. Which seems to be like the modern day playbook. But only time will tell, right? Because also, like, I'm also not sure what the lifetime is going to be for Fortnite, right? Because no game is going to be a forever game, right? I guess, yeah. I can't see Fortnite running until forever, you know? Like, there's going to be, at some point, there's going to be the new thing where people are going to latch onto it, where Fortnite is not going to be set up to be able to handle that, right? Whether it's like, I don't know, server capacity or game modes or whatever. Not necessarily game modes, but logic, I guess. So we'll see. I'm curious. Yeah. We will have to see, I guess. It's it's an interesting move. And then I was also catching up with some other news that people had shared in the community as well, talking about like the weird stuff that's going on with like Ubisoft now, where Ubisoft had halted trading of all shares, and also didn't release like their latest financial earnings. They delayed all of it, which is really weird. And a lot of people are speculating that it's about like acquisition rumors and all that kind of stuff. But I find this weird because they say that like, okay, so if we go with the speculation where they say that it's like Tencent or Sony, right? Those seem to be like the two big ones that are speculating about like buying them up. Then that makes me think about like why would Tencent do that? Because they literally signed like a $2 billion deal to already have like a spin-off of Ubisoft with Tencent involved, right? So that makes no sense why they would then buy like the other part as well when they already have a deal going on, because then they could have just bought it outright. You know? Feels so weird. Ubisoft is sadly cooked from the inside. Yeah. It's unfortunate. I still have like a lot of my friends working there, and I don't wish like anything to them. But it gets, from my position, it gets increasingly more difficult to see how they're gonna get out of it, right? Even with the current plan, right, where Ubisoft is gonna split up into multiple creative houses that are gonna have separate ownership of like multiple IPs, right? That that is, I guess, like a business move to counteract them potentially, I don't know, being dropped from the stock exchange, right? Because once you go under like a certain valuation, you do get dropped from the stock exchange as well. So I don't know if that's like a play to like take them private before it drops and they're not public anymore. I don't know. Yeah, it's definitely. I'm definitely worried about like the stuff that's happening. Even if with the latest rumors and like all the delays of like, I don't know, the rumors of like the acquisition and let's say delaying their financial results and all that kind of stuff. Like even before I was concerned as well. It's yeah, it's a tough position to be in, and they were already in sort of like a tough spot before all the venture capital kind of dried up, right? So yeah. Hey guys, don't forget to like the video. Oh, thanks, Psychomantis. All right. So enough yapping. Let's switch on over to some feedback, right? I do also want to give a reminder that if you have a question about the games industry, about becoming an environment artist yourself, or I don't know, you want to take your art to the next level or have some career questions, feel free to ask, and then we can kind of weave that into the formula, right? Because I love having like a discussion in between things as well to kind of break things up. If you have any questions about working in games, feel free to let me know. Let's switch on over. Hello, Long Pig. Oh, and of course, if you want to go first. There's already hands up in the chat. Okay. I love it. I love it. Okay. Hello, designer. Good to see you here. It's yeah, it's that time again. Exactly. It is exactly that time again. B and Leia are literally spawn campers. Exactly. Oh, Long Pig, you timed to slow pan down exactly when I joined. Yeah. Your entrance in the chat needs to be dramatic, you know? Like we need to set the right tone for your entrance to the chat. Okay, so first one we have Leia, then Sergio, then Victoria. Let's have a look. Unfortunately, I do have to say, Darth Vader team as an interest team. There were two people that submitted too late, so Momen and God, I cannot streamer mode. Stop. So Moment and Vanessa's threads are not going to be included in this Whip Wednesday, unfortunately. Gotta be a little bit strict with that. Long Pig is saying you need to set it up so the Vader team plays when you pan it down. Oh, that would be cool. That would be cool. Okay, so first, Leia. I think this is gonna be like relatively quick for you, right, Leia? Because you're reworking your textures, you sculpted a custom wood trim sheet, and you used color curves in vertex paint to create more subtle variation. Due to the time constraints, I have to move on to other assets such as the defense walls, which I want to approach with the same hand-sculpted mindset. To my question, based on the level of quality that I created in the log house, what area do you think that I should improve while tackling this asset? What area do you think I should improve while tackling this asset? Well, I think honestly, like the big candidate is just like this big block out thing, right? Like the wall that is here. I would definitely start with that. But if you ever question yourself in like, hey, what should I do next? Let's come up with a system, right? An easy system is you go into your camera first, because that's the thing that matters, right? So you go into your camera first. Second, you look at the biggest asset that needs the most work, and that's the one that you take, right? It's a really simple framing of just being like, okay, what do I do next? And sometimes you just need to strip yourself out of overthinking and just be like, okay, let's focus on the camera. That is the biggest thing. I'm going to do that. Because, for example, what I might say now is that this is, for example, this is the thing that you want to focus on, right? But if we then go to the camera, right, because I have this context now, the main camera, you can't even see that wall. So from that perspective, because it's not visible in any of the cameras, then we shouldn't really focus on that because it's not that important, right? However, if you're going to do additional cameras and all that kind of stuff, then focus on the biggest thing. And with biggest, I mean by screen percentage. That sounds really fancy, right? But it's just what is the biggest thing on your screen, really. And then sometimes I try to break the rules, because sometimes you don't want to do the biggest thing on your screen. But sometimes I just have those days where it's like, hey, look, I know that I need to do that, but today I'm having like an off day, so I'm gonna focus on anything else. So biggest screen percentage, first one is a camera, and then the third one is just what you want to do, right? So like you want to do stuff. Because there have definitely been times where I was like, okay, I need to do this, but I kind of want to, I don't know, tweak our material setup or something like that. And it needs to happen anyway, but further down the line. But if you do it now, then it's done for the future, right? I just wanted to clarify one thing, because you did say that you were gonna go with the same hand sculpted method. And that kind of led me to asking you a question of how can we reuse this texture more, right? Because we created this really cool looking texture. I would say that it can actually be good to just reuse it as much as possible, right? Anything that's wood, just slap it on there, and it's going to be looking way cooler than it does now. But yeah, in terms of like the cameras that you've shown off, this could be a great candidate to tackle next. Trodium is saying, did you cross Jam and Jerobayev in your career? It would be cool to have you both on a podcast. No, but I've been following Jama's work for quite a while, because in the beginning, before I turned to 3D art, or like 3D environment art, I was actually studying to become like a concept artist. So I have a lot of like a background in 2D, and I was listening to like a lot of his stuff and other people's like podcasts and advice that they were putting out too. So big inspiration for sure. But it would be cool. I would love to do a podcast again. Oh, and the last thing that I'll say is I know that you don't have time to go back on it, Leia, but this texture looks really gray. I don't know if that is still planned to do some more work on, but definitely infuse it with some color, you know? Definitely make it look like nice and wooden. My reasoning right now is to focus on this asset because it mixes wood and stone, so later I can tackle the house with a more solid approach, as they are more closer to the viewer's field of view. Yeah, I mean that's also a good method to think about it, right? Because sometimes this is basically what we usually call is the benchmark method, right? So what you do is you build a benchmark. This benchmark has all the textures all the materials and all, I would say like all the textures, all the materials, and all the modeling complexity, I guess. So we know that once we've done our benchmark, then we can easily spread this all out to like the rest of the scene, right? Because all those components are going to be used in the scene. So yeah, that's basically what you're doing now, right? You're basically building your own little benchmark. And then from those textures and materials and models, you can then build the rest of the scene up, right? To a certain degree. So, yeah. That sounds good. It's a very common approach, especially more common in the beginning of a project, right? Yeah, Psychomantis is like the overall Psychomantis is saying the benchmark is like the overall quality you're trying to hit, right? Like to look like Crysis. Yeah, exactly. But in the context of this, it can also be to inform yourself about the techniques and the workflows that you need as well, right? So usually the goal of a benchmark is to set yourself an example of what the final look is going to be, right? If we're taking this into a game context, we would then build a benchmark to kind of give us a goal for like the final quality. But through that, you're going to also explore the workflows and all the things needed to get you there too, right? So I guess, yeah, the goal is to go for like the quality that you want to set, and then through that method, you're gonna explore how to get there. So yeah, that's a great way of saying it. Did you have situations where you had to scale down the UVs of an asset so you could fit it on trim sheet? Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, that's normal with a trim sheet, right? So yeah, let's say the bounds slightly overlap the bounds of a trim sheet selection by under 20%. Usually if you want to scale UVs, this is like a loose kind of rule that I have for the way that I work, right? It's like you try to keep things into like 1.3 of a scale or close to like 1.7 of a scale. So that's like the range that you have with how much you can scale up and down before I get uncomfortable with how it looks, right? Some people push it more, some people push it less. And it also depends on how visible it's going to be, right? Let's say you have like a small little chunk of your UVs. You can then squeeze it down, right? Yeah, that's very common to kind of scale it down, especially for the trim sheet, right? You have to, unless you get so specific that you almost make like a hotspot texture, which a hotspot texture is basically a trim sheet that is specifically made to match a variety of different circumstances, right? So instead of just focusing on trims, instead of focusing on like individual trims, they basically have like any sort of surface type already set into their UVs, and then they have a tool that scales it automatically to the best size for whatever surface area they need. Half-Life Alyx use this. I know that like it's even embedded into the engine that Valve has. Like when you build like a level using like BSBs or blockouts, then it will automatically already apply UVs and all that kind of stuff, from what I know. There's also an add-on in Blender that does this, that can help you with that as well, called Zen UV, which is really interesting to look into. I think Santa Monica are the only ones that won't scale UVs. Gears of War is very precise with UV scales. Well, oh yeah, God of War, yeah. Well, it kind of depends, right? Like you can choose not to, and you can, for example, leave more of your UVs open, right? Or become so hyper focused on maximizing your UV like coverage that you kind of go a little bit crazy, right? Or they have a really good tool that does some like packing behind the scenes, right? Because I can assume every studio does this, because sometimes what happens is you pack all your UVs and you're like on, let's say, texel density, right? So let's say, I'll give you a quick example, right? Which is my logic why everyone does this. Let's say you have like your asset and your UVs take up this space. What do? Do you leave this empty? No, right? That would be silly. So you just scale it up by that percentage, which is not going to break your textile density. It's just going to be slightly higher resolution now. You maximize all the resources that you have on your texture, but it does mean that you technically broke texture resolution. But this difference is not going to make that much of a difference in resolution, but it is going to make a difference in how optimized your textures are going to be, right? Because let's say that this is like, I don't know, let's say 10% wastage, right? If we then do that on every single asset in our game, that means that we're just throwing out 10% overhead for like all the textures that we have to load in, right? Which is just, it's just not great. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work, Leia. Top G is here, and Sheila is here as well. Same with Swan and Darren. Good to see you all here. Psychomantis says, understood. Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I mean, if you have any of those questions when it comes to game dev or any of the weird terms that I tend to like spit out at a rapid pace, feel free to ask about them, right? That is what this stream is all about. Vega Loca is asking, can we use that space for decals or trims? You can use that space for anything you want, right? But you want to, the way that I tend to approach UV space in that way is you want to keep it related to the asset that you are making, right? So for example, if you have a texture that is made for, I don't know, let's say we're going to make it really simple, right? A metal box. So this is like a metal box is unwrapped onto the section, right? And you're then like, I can add like a rope in here. However, whenever you're gonna use this rope, right? So let's imagine that there's like a rope that we added in here as an example. Whenever we use this rope in the game, we are also pulling in the rest of that texture too. So from that perspective, if we have a scene where we only use a rope, we are then also using 90% of a texture that we can't even see in our scene. Right? So that is where you have to be very careful that you be a little bit consistent with what you add on there. But for example, if this metal box has like, I don't know, has like a little lock on it, and then you can map it in this area, that's totally fine, right? As long as it's related to the thing that we're making, then that's good. Good point, thanks. No, thank you for the question. I was going to ask about texel density scaling, if it's allowed, but you already answered it. Yeah! That's why we have trim, hybrid, and atlas textures. It just needs to be laid out in a way that lets you reuse the texture in your project multiple times. It's all about smart layouts. Yeah, and honestly, this is where what I tend to do. So this also is a great question when it comes in terms to trim sheets, right? Because when you make your first trim sheet for a project, what you tend to do is you tend to pack different materials or like surface materials into one trim sheet, right? So let's say you have a metal trim, you have a wood trim, and all that kind of stuff. I prefer not to do that, because then whenever I only want to build something out of metal, that means that I'm also pulling in like all the wood stuff too, right? So I tend to have, let's say, let's give another example here. So let's say we have a trim sheet that's divided in two, and the top part is metal, and the bottom part is wood. What I tend to do then is I just tend to like cut it in half and make it a 2x1 texture, right? So that we use this as like a separate texture, and then we use this as a separate texture as well. And that makes it a bit more flexible when it comes in terms to management. Just noticed them using a new paint over color. Yeah, I know. We're going green. Yeah. Also, you got like a bunch of like additional notes on your overpaint layer. So enjoy them. You get like a little bit of a coloring book, you know, for free. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your work, Leia. For people that are wondering about textile density, right? I'm gonna shamelessly share one of the resources that I set up on our website that talks all about this, right? So I wrote like an extensive deep dive into textile density, how to set it up, how to calculate it, like where it matters, how it matters, add-ons, all that kind of stuff. I wrote like a deep dive on that topic as well. So feel free to read that page if you are interested in learning more about textile density. Right. Next one up. We have Sergio. Let's have a look. So Sergio is asking two questions. The first one is about the color variation, right? So this is for the team challenge, final week. So yeah, this is a little bit scary to see this in the final week, but I'll let that slip through the fingers, Sergio. You're asking the question: is there enough color variation on the hut? I still have to do RGBA mask and most of the pieces, and also, is there enough height variation? Okay, so first things first. Is the color variation good? I think as a base, it is good, right? But I would only start thinking about this once you've done like all the additional layers of setup, right? Because what we want to do is we want to balance all the visuals when we have all the information, right? Because right now what is happening is we're trying to anticipate changes that are still coming down the line, even though we don't know what the effect on them is going to be, right? So get those RGBA masks in, and then we can have a proper look into like how to rebalance like everything, right? But for now, I'm not really seeing like any major concerns. And I think you got like a decent amount of like color variation. And then once you got the RGBA mask added, then we can have another look at how much we need to tone things down or how much we need to add things up again. And then your second part of the question, which is, it's kind of a sneaky one because people keep adding in like multiple questions in one questions. How dare you? So the second part of the question is about the height variation, right? Because you were playing around with the height variation of planks, but I honestly don't really care about that. The thing that has the biggest impact on the acid is the rotation and the general scale and any other silhouette changes, right? Because for the most part, like we can't even see. Like let's say this one, you scale that up by like twice the size. I can't even see that, right? That's going to be like relatively invisible. However, if this is going to be rotated to the side now, that's going to be very visible. So I would always focus on like the biggest impact on the silhouette and the asset visually, right? Which is definitely like the broken up angles and the rotation and yeah, the silhouette of the asset as well. So yeah, that's what I said here. Height variation doesn't matter as much as the rotation and scale variation. And then the second question is, does the destruction, the broken and moved planks make sense? And does it need more destruction? This is a difficult one to answer for me because I'm lacking the context, right? And what I mean with the context here is that I need to know, first of all, how did it happen? Did something collapse in? Did something come out? Did this happen with like natural decay? Because those types of damage, they're gonna have different ways of manifesting themselves, right? Because for example, if a tree grew out, then what you want to see is you want to see the planks like shift upwards and break apart that way, right? If a tree fell through the ceiling the opposite way, then obviously it's going to be caved in, right? On a more general note, though, I would definitely play around with the silhouette a little bit more, so that you can even have like this go up and down a little bit more, and then also break the whole silhouette of the house, right? Because right now, the silhouette is just straight, and I think with like a couple of touches, we can make it actually really interesting. By just like pointing stuff down and then maybe having like, I don't know, a bit more silhouette breakup here or something, right? And then depending on how heavy you want to go with the destruction, it could be cool to have a couple of these planks missing as well, right? So that we create like an additional hole here, maybe. But this sort of damage depends on the camera angle. Hey Tim, you reminded me to do the most important thing as a 3D artist. Remember, you're a human being and drink some water. Well, I'm trying to get better at that myself. Back when I used to do streams on Twitch and all that kind of stuff, I actually had a button for that where people could like remind me to stay hydrated, and that actually helped a lot. So I think when I get back to like streaming on Twitch, which I plan to, I think that could be interesting to bring that back, you know. So yeah, everyone stay hydrated, drink a bit of water. If my girlfriend is listening, she's gonna be she's gonna be laughing because oh my god, I don't drink enough water to save my own life. How do I create a stone wall for games? We're gonna get into it, Melkal. We're gonna do that was one of the questions that we had, so we're gonna dive into it in a little bit. Justine is saying, when the team challenges are completed, will there be a special showcase video or breakdowns? Yeah, so we actually, that's a good reminder. I completely forgot to mention that. We're going to have a big final live stream on Sunday. So after this live stream, I will make an event for that on a YouTube channel so that you can see when that's going to go live. Because we're going to have a massive finale live stream where we're going to show off everyone's work. I'm going to be joined by 2 of our judges as well, who are going to help and give like additional feedback and praise the work that has been done. And we're also going to be announcing like the winners. We're going to hand out like awards, and there's going to be some cool stuff happening. So yeah, thank you for the reminder, Justine. Gonna have some cool stuff happening. Looking forward to it. Yeah, it's gonna be cool. Right, that was it for this one, Sergio. So thank you so much for posting your work, and good luck with the team challenges, man. Final week, final push, so keep at it. We're nearly there. Rightio. We're gonna go to Victoria. There's another beautiful question in the chat. So Foxy Kiss is saying, do you think it's better to go with 4K textures for props in the portfolio or stick with the lower ones as to show that I can work with limitations? Well, listen to our previous conversation that we had like 20 minutes ago. The most important thing is texel density. The raw texture size depends on the size of the prop, right? Because, for example, if you're making like a massive machine that you want to have like super highly detailed, a 4K texture is not going to be enough. But if you're making like one fork, then you don't need a 4K texture, right? So it depends on the prop that you want to make And for that, we have to look at your textile density. So textile density is kind of like a measure to say this is the amount of pixels that we're going to be using per surface area, right? That's why we say a common textile density right now is like 1K or 1024 per meter in a game, right? This also depends on which games and all that kind of stuff, but roughly, if you want to get like a benchmark, right? So if you go higher than that, and let's say you're going to be using like 2K per meters or 4K per meters, then you do have to be able to justify that a little bit, but it is still a portfolio, right? So for a portfolio, I would say that like the visuals come first and then the optimization, right? Hey Tim, if you're making a huge ship in a desert like a cargo ship, how do you tackle that? It won't fit in a 1-to-1 UV square or even AK. No, you have to build it up using multiple techniques. So that's where we use techniques like for the base, we use tidables in most cases, right? So let's say the ship is all rusted and all that kind of stuff. We use tidables. So we get like a base metal going on. And then where the rust happens, that's where we add RGB masking, which is using your second UV at a lower resolution. But because it is a mask, we can get away with that lower resolution. And then we can blend in additional masks inside of our engine to then give it some additional resolution back, which is like this really clever trick of trying to get the most out of like both workflows. But there's so many ways that you can get around that. You can store that masking information in your vertex colors, which is called like vertex painting, right? So that allows you to paint on the actual mesh. There's also what I tend to do is I store things in the vertex color, but then I don't use vertex paint. I just bake it into the asset. There's texture paint. There's all kinds of ways, but usually for a large asset, you can never use a 1-to-1 texture. That will never work. The only way that you could potentially make that work is by splitting it up into multiple texture sets. But I would not necessarily recommend that for games, because we're going into like the territory of like UDIMs, which is like a term that is heavily used in VFX, for example. When working on movies, you use UDIM textures, which is basically instead of using your UV as like this endless tileable thing, you make it so that every square of your UV has a different ID attached to it, and you can sample them differently. But that is not common to use in games. Not common at all. Right, Victoria. Let's have a look here. Go on to your fishing boat. Thank you for last week's feedback. There was something you've mentioned last time that I was trying to figure out from the blockout stage and the way that the bottom looks like. The V-shape got me questioning what exactly is that. From the references I found, it seems like a concept art that was trying to combine the two types of the boat. Yeah, so that's what we're seeing down at the bottom here, right? We're trying to find out what this is, like that little hump, right? And then you went on like this cool little hunt to kind of figure out where that thing came from. And I think you might be right that it comes from like two boats that are combined, right? But honestly, when I looked at this, I thought that what it was just, it's almost like you sat in an old sofa for too long and you have like this divot that you have in the cushion, right? I think that might have happened, honestly. Like, I'm almost imagining a person just sitting in here for the longest time. And then just because over time, like the boat, instead of it becoming like a rudder, like the boat just like it gave way to his weight or to their weight, you know? Oh, there goes the camera. Yeah, as I told you guys, battery is exhausted, so let's give it a bit. So yeah, I think that's what I think happens there, is that it's just a person that sat there for too long and the boat just like kind of settled in, right? Because I'm imagining that the way that these boats are made out of like this interwoven herringbone, I guess bamboo, kind of just like stitched together. That's going to be relatively flexible, right? So even if it's wood, it could be like that. I think so, and I think also, it could, but it could also not be. But I think what I wanted to highlight here is that sometimes we get realism get into the way of the rule of cool, which is just sometimes something looks like really interesting and you want to integrate that into your asset. In this case, just do it, right? Because it looks really interesting and it adds to the silhouette, right? So that's why it could just be like really interesting to add. Because sometimes, even though it's not 100% logical, right, and it doesn't 100% make sense, it is still interesting to have it there, regardless. The rule of cool. Exactly, Swan. Exactly. When I tried it, I liked it better. Yeah, see, and I think that's the most important benchmark. Because even if you said I tried it and I hated it, I would have told you to not do it then, right? Because what art to the core still is an expression of like our own worldview and our own, like, the way that we see the world and the way that we see our art and all that kind of stuff. It's still yours, right? So sometimes it's worth trying something, and then if you like it, you can keep it and iterate it, and if you don't like it, then just delete it again. Hello, Tobias. Yeah, just a long way of saying that sometimes you can kind of deviate from like realism, kind of to make it look interesting. Would you suggest to keep it or make it a bit different? No, I would definitely keep it. I think even you turning it into kind of like a rudder is kind of cool as well. Thanks, Psychomantis. I'll drink it. I promise you, even though like the camera is dead for a bit, I promise I'm drinking, okay? Mm-mm-mm. Right. Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you for showcasing your work. And yeah, that attention to detail is definitely gonna make it, you know? Plus, I also really like what you started doing with like the additional bamboo, right? It starts to feel like way more organic already. So great work there. I love it. Cool. Thank you, Victoria. I'll bring the wood details and see how it goes. I have faith in you. You're gonna crush it. Let's see, a couple of questions. Darren is saying, is using the rust decal better for performance than RGB masking? No, I don't think so, because with a decal, you're gonna end up with a lot of opacity, right? And especially if you have to have like a projecting decal or something like that, that's gonna be more costly than RGB masking. Whereas also, if you think about it, the way that the reason why we use RGB masking is because it allows for bigger productions, right? If that is the way that everyone works, it is way easier to set up like a couple of quick masks than to do like, I don't know, a bunch of decals on every single asset in the scene. It just becomes really cumbersome, right? So it's more from like a pipeline perspective that it's also way more efficient as well. Foxy is saying, in what situation do you think the artists have to use layered materials, for example, instead of creating them in Substance Painter? It's the same kind of thing that. Eugenie, I'll answer your question in a bit. Sorry. So the difference between layered materials inside of Unreal and inside the Substance Painter is it's a different workflow in terms of how you build up your resources, right? What you do with layered materials is you use tidables, and those tidables can be shared between like a bunch of assets, where if you add them into a unique texture in Substance Painter, you're going to have to create a unique texture for every single asset you do, right? So the more you use your layered material setup throughout your entire game or scene, the more performant it's going to be, right? Because you're reusing the same total resources. Whereas if we then compare that to Substance Painter, we are encoding all that same information into a single texture, but we can't reuse that texture between multiple assets, right? So that's where the bottleneck is, because now we need to create a new texture set for every single asset that we make, rather than using reusable resources. What do you mean by baking vertex paint in engine or vertex color? Is it to get inclusion in cavity for mask blending? No, you can actually use it to drive masking. So if you have ever used RGB masking, it is basically just using like the R, G, B, and A channel to store separate masks in, right? You can also do that with the modeling tools inside of Unreal Engine. So the way that I actually set that up is instead of, for my medieval scene that I was making, instead of making things in a way where I needed to go back to Substance Painter and then set up the mask there, what I would do is I would actually bake all those layers inside of the engine itself. Because it's very rudimentary, right? But you can bake like AO, I think you can bake like world position and some other stuff in there. But if you then set up your materials in such a way that they get like blended with other, I don't know, tidable noises, it can be like a very efficient way of then creating material layers inside of the engine, rather than going in between Substance Painter. So yeah, I way prefer that way of working, because I wanna optimize like the systems behind it as much as I can, because then I can just model an asset in Blender, export it to the engine, make sure that the UVs are correct. I press one button and it has the setup that I need. It's done. The same is also used in one of the Quixel demos where they do like the spaceship for Fortnite. They kind of use like the same way of working, where they store all their masking information in the vertex color as well by baking it. Vanessa is asking, for big detailed objects, would you rather bake something like a detail normal or UV2, normal for bevels, rather than adding decals, or is there a better way? Example, trains and such. So with trains, it kind of depends on what you kind of want to achieve, right? But the way that I would set up a train is, let's say the main body of the train would be mostly tidables with maybe some masks to differentiate between, like, let's say certain colors, right? So that you have that as a base layer. And then on top of it, you would then have like a decal sheet, because you're going to have like random bits of decals and numbers and serial numbers, right? That you want to have as like little decals that you can add, but they can be embedded into the mesh. I wouldn't add them into Unreal Engine itself. And then for the, let's say the undercarriage, right? Where you want to have like a lot of detail, I would do that unique. Because now what we're trying to do is we're leveraging the workflow for the maximized efficiency for what it needs to bring to the table, right? Because, for example, we can do the undercarriage by like just the tidable textures and all that kind of stuff, and then blending them with masks and all that. But it is probably way easier to just make it unique at that point. And then maybe even turn it into like a little modular kit where you can have like reusable springs, reusable wheels, and all that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, that's in general the way that I would do it. And then even in that case, you can still use detail normal if you feel like certain surfaces are lacking some sort of like normal response, right? Yeah. On a recent project, we also spread the UVs into 4 separate tiles, and in the Unreal Engine shader, we can add color, metalness, and whatever we want to different tile numbers. Yeah, this is the beauty about game dev, right? There's so many ways of approaching a single thing that it's kind of really interesting, because like every sort of workflow kind of has like pros and cons, right? For example, the traditional high to low poly workflow might be cumbersome to kind of set up, but it allows you to have like the most textural detail in the most straightforward way, right? Whereas like, let's say a second UV setup with an RGB mask, you can get pretty close sometimes in terms of like textural detail, but you're also relying on an elaborate setup on the shader side, right? So you kind of need someone who's kind of managing the material and the shader side of things, right? So you can kind of see those workflows as like, how can you play into your strengths, right? If you're more tech oriented, you can go into RGB masking and have like all the materials set up in Unreal. Whereas you're more like a traditional artist and let's say you're very used to Photoshop and you just want to get from like, you kind of want to dive into that aspect a bit more, where you can just go from a layered kind of setup, then obviously Painter is going to be for you. Let's see, did my batteries already charge a bit? A little bit. We'll see how far we get. Awesome. Thank you. No worries. No worries. Happy to help. And thank you for the question. Right. Where were we? Let's see. Who was next in the list? So we had Victoria. Unfortunately, let's see. There's a couple of people. I think Vanessa, you might have missed the deadline for the submission, so we'll unfortunately have to skip you for this time. Let's see. And Victoria, Jose. Let's see. Do we have like any more people? Sheila saying I'm a bit late. Oh, let's start with Sheila then. Let's start with Sheila. We'll see at the end of the session if we have some time left. If we can squeeze people in. But no promises. Cool. So Sheila's working on a... Yeah, Foki, you're here. So Foki Sarah is here. We're going to be talking about your work in just a second. So that's all good. We'll get to you in just a second. Yay! Hell yeah. Okay. I spent quite some time on this challenge and now it's ended. I was wondering if it's worth adding this work to my portfolio and maybe improving it before posting. If so, I'd like to ask for feedback. I was only provided assets and materials, and I created the buoy from scratch and built a story around it. How can I improve the overall scene in the hero prop? So, cool. First of all, I do like how you textured the whole buoy, right? It looks really, really good. I think you got some really nice surface definition, and I think you made like an awesome prop. So I think that's great. The biggest concerns that I have are with the environment, right? Sorry, let's go for the question. So Plagomant is saying, let's say one is late with posting for Wednesday. Can you pick it up next Wednesday? Yeah. It will automatically be picked up next week. But usually that's the way that it goes. But we'll see where we get to the end of this session. So we're talking about this environment, and you try to build a story around it, but I still feel like it's really lacking when it comes to that story, right? That is obviously a constraint of the setup, right? Of the challenge, which it kind of is what it is. But because you are doing some additional work of getting it to look good for your portfolio, I think that's worth spending it on a couple of things that could make more of an impact, right? Because you had this whole thematic of like send water, so it's kind of linking me to, let's say, the whole droughts and like everything's a desert. It's probably the end of the world. Who knows? Very Mad Max situation. Maybe we can link that to the sea more. So, and I'm imagining that we could potentially have like a dock or something like recognizable here. Maybe like a crane or something like that. Just something that gives this entire just pile of like relatively random looking stuff, it gives it a bit more importance and identity. I think that would be the thing that I would be looking for first, because then at that point we can then be like, okay, there's like this massive crane. That's cool. This was probably like a former dock area, and then you see like this kind of message, and then maybe there's like large ships or something like that in the background, which could also be cool. And then we're kind of hinting at like this massive dry seabed where there's like no water available anymore. It's been ages since anyone has seen water, right? So maybe that would be my recommendation. Because honestly, at this point, because you said yourself, the challenge is done, right? I would honestly forget about the restrictions of the challenge and see how can you improve upon it without those restrictions being there, right? And that's where I just thought about like infusing it with like some identity, right? Where you have like, I don't know, a crane still left standing in the middle of the desert or something like that. I'm thinking, and I'm also thinking about like what you can reuse from the assets that are already there, right? Because you have some gantries, you have like this thing. If you can potentially like cobble things together and kind of make it look like it's a crane. And I think you could honestly get away with that like, quite well. But yeah, just adding some more identity into the mix, right? Where we can see what this was. And then, yeah, kind of tying it into the whole send water, like drought situation. Because yeah, like that was the main goal for this feedback for me. It was like clarifying the purpose of all this stuff that's happening here in a visual manner, right? That's my goal. Would you suggest to recreate the full scene with assets made by me or still use already made assets? Oh no, I don't think you have to go back to the drawing board and recreate everything from scratch, right? That's why I'm saying focus on the things that give it identity. See, the way that I would go about this is so the first thing we already discussed, right? So what can I add to add identity to the scene? Right? So cool. That's step one. Let's say we do a crane, right? As an example. Then what I would do then is look at existing stuff and see if we can actually just cobble stuff together from existing assets. And if that works, good. Then we don't have to do step 3. But step 3 would be, ooh, it's not going to work. Okay, let me see if we can make like a new asset. God, what is going on with my mouse? That's the way that I would go about it. Because I don't think you need to go like all the way back, right? Because then I don't think that's going to be worth it. But I would just focus on like one big thing or like maybe 2 big things that you can add in a scene to kind of add more context to it. And if you can get away, well, the crane you could potentially get away by by reusing stuff that's already in the scene, right? Because I'm seeing stuff that I can cobble together, which is good. But if you wanted to make, like, let's say those bigger ships in the background, like, it's not even the ships, right? It's the cargo containers of the ships that are attached to them. If you want to make those, yeah, you might have to do some things from scratch. But that's the way that I would do. It's a good question. And yeah. Thank you, Sheila, for posting the work. Because yeah, I think it's already interesting. Usually already picking up on a question like, let's say, do you think it's worth adding this to my portfolio? That already hints to me that you're not satisfied with the quality and we need to do some things to kind of get it there. And this is the way that I would get there. Hey, Design Henry, thank you for the sub. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for supporting us. Cool. Thank you, Sheila. You're only proud of the buoy. Well, in the worst case scenario, if that is literally the only thing you're proud of, right, and you don't think the rest of the scene can be salvaged, you just have an asset, right? What you can then do is, you know, disregard the rest of the scene and kind of just almost do it as like a little diorama. That could potentially be an interesting one. So there are options there, you know? It just depends on what you want to do, right, with the scene. Or what the goal is for the scene. Because again, like, this is a common thing for us artists in general, right? Like, sometimes what you want to do is you just want to move on, and then just seeing what the quickest way is to kind of get this done and presentable, and then just move on to the next thing. Yeah. Sometimes it's also totally fine to just like scrap the rest because you're not happy with it and just turn it into like a small diorama that you can really just like polish up to the quality that you're interested in. So that's also an option. Yeah. But yeah. Don't be too hard on yourself, Sheila. I would also say send this to a couple of other people too, get their pointers as well, and then see what they think about it. Because to me, you know, like, there might need to be some like more material work that needs to be done for these materials. But once you add like some identity into the mix and you kind of make it look like, I don't know, the sea has dried up or something like that, you know, like, I think that's gonna be enough for the scene, in my opinion, or it can be enough. Right. Best of luck with figuring that out, Sheila. Vidar saying, I think this looks very visually pleasing. Yeah, kind of getting some really cool Mad Max vibes, right? I do like it. All right, so now we're going to be talking about the thing that's in the title, right? So how do we create stone walls in our scene? Because this was a question posed by Anchor. Because Anchor is making a temple, and it was like a whole bunch of questions all about like how to make a stone wall, right? So I tried to distill this down into 2 questions that we can kind of look at. From a general sense, if you want to make a stone wall like this, right? Let's say even a tower, right? Like, how would you go about that? The traditional way is to do that with a tileable, right? So you first off have a tileable, and then you kind of work your way around the tileable, right? For this wall, we have to do a little bit more modeling. But then occasionally what we do is we add in like a unique brick or a unique piece of cobble or something like that to kind of add more interest to the silhouette, right? For example, you see that here where we can kind of build the core of this wall and then have like occasional things like sticking out to offer us a bit more of a silhouette breakup. That is definitely misspelled, but don't care. So that is the traditional way, right? So a tileable for the main surface and then individual rocks or pebbles or cobbles for the silhouette, right? That combination gives us a lot of flexibility to honestly, basically build everything we want with those two simple things, right? Because now think about it, we can make a shape like this, we can make a shape like this, and we can just cobble it together from like slapping a tileable on the main surface, and then wherever we need it, we can just go in and have like individual like bricks on top of it, right? It's a very flexible way of working. It allows us to build all kind of shapes and sizes, and it's very convenient for that way. Now, this is the way that you were going about it specifically, right? So this is the more traditional, very modular approach, right? Where you're kind of trying to construct everything onto a grid, which in this case doesn't really work that well, because what I think is the beauty about these like more organic, let's say man-made houses set in the hillside, right, is that they get a lot of character from the silhouette and from the way that they're built and how crooked or like how offset they are. Whereas a modular kit by design is meant to be reused without like big modifications, right? So a straight wall is almost going to be a straight wall because as soon as you make it crooked, it's going to be crooked on all the other ones as well. So I think the way that you go about like making a scene like this is you want to focus on the more flexible approach, and then you make it more unique, right? So instead of trying to form all the buildings in your scene into like a Lego kit that you can reuse, it is honestly sometimes simpler to just go to a box, slap a tileable on it, and wherever you need, like you just go in and like match bricks with the tileable, and that's how you create like this really nice silhouette, right? Because honestly, for the most part of this wall, we don't really care that much about this detail, because it is super easy to get that detail from a tileable, right? Because think about a tileable. Once we start adding like a couple of like more advanced techniques on top of it, where let's say we use parallax occlusion mapping, which gives us like a bit of fake depth, I think that's enough to convince us that the two actually are all geometry where they're not supposed to be, right? Because this is what game dev is all about. It's all smoke and mirrors, right? We're trying to squeeze the maximum performance while not trying to, well, to get as close to like the visual benchmark that we set. Excuse me. So yeah. So in this case, what I would do instead is I would go for an approach that assumes that like most of the buildings are going to be unique, right? Unique as in like this building is going to be different from this building, and we're going to treat it as such by building it as like separate buildings that we can then export and import to Unreal Engine as like entire assets rather than trying to break them up into modular pieces. That might be a good workflow for if you wanna build like an entire city, right? But if we're just trying to make a mountain temple or something like that, I don't think we're gonna get too much leverage out of it. Especially because these are the two buildings that we want to hit, right? So, yeah. Cool. And then here's like some additional stuff to explain how we go about building the modules, right? So we already talked about the traditional approach, which is tileables plus low poly meshes, and then combine them either in Blender or Unreal, right? Sorry, I just did Unreal again. So combine them into Unreal or Blender. However, what I think is going to be more and more common is that we are going to use tilables, then displacement, and then do a little bit of cleanup, and then have our unique assets, right? So the way that this differs from the traditional technique, where we still have the individual low poly meshes that we have to kind of like tile up with the match up with the tileable, is that we use the tileable, displace that using the height map, and then do cleanup. This is the way that I personally prefer to work, because it is even more flexible than having to match a tileable with low poly meshes and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like we can actually get really close, or like we can even get like pretty optimized with this as well. But it depends on the constraints of your target game or platform, right? But let's say for Unreal Engine, if we're going to go for like a high spec PC, we have Nanite available as well. Not saying that it's like the cure-all for all this kind of stuff, but we can kind of use more higher poly counts. Which means that in this case, what I would do is, instead of trying to individually like model them all out, I would again just use a tileable and then do displacement on top of this, and then clean that displacement up. So what I would then do is I can then say, like, okay, let's say we have a corner of our house, right? Let's say this is my house corner. Cool. So with this technique, everything is going to be like pretty high poly, right? But even in like your displacement, you can say, hey, I want the details to be more focused on this area. So for example, this is what I would do in Blender, where you can tell your displacement or your decimation to be more focused on this area instead of all the other areas. So that's what that's the thing that can really be leveraged to our advantage, where we can then decide like, hey, that is on this part of the asset, that is where I want more detail. So then I'm gonna optimize the rest of it, right? So imagine a decimation modifier on top of this entire building, or like this entire wall, basically. And then you just paint in the areas where you want to have more detail, because you can do that with weight painting. And then add that in as like a vertex group. And then whatever you paint in that vertex group is going to be more or less optimized, which is a really interesting thing. God. Okay, we're back. That I started using on some of my buildings when I was last working on them. But yeah. Hopefully that explains a little bit, like a quick overview on how to build like walls in games, right? Because, for example, the technique that you use here could work. However, what we then need to contend with as well is, with houses, if we're doing it for a game, we want to make them watertight. That means that we need to have some sort of thickness in the wall, and we can't have any gaps, because then we're going to have light leaking. Which is where something like this, for example, is going to cause a lot of light leaking, because we have probably like tiny gaps between all the individual bits, right? Individual stones. So that's an easy way to get rid of that too. Cool. And thank you for the sub, Abhishek. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your support. Do you displace the wall using a modifier in Blender? Yeah, so that's the way that I would do it, but you can also use displacement with Nanite now, right? For full transparency, like even transparency, it sounds so dramatic. Even when I build my medieval scene, I am currently transitioning into Nanite, but I don't use Nanite in the way that they intend, right? Because the logical thing now, if you're starting from scratch, is that you use Nanite displacement inside of the engine, because then you get the benefit of like all the optimization and all that kind of stuff, right? And you get to tweak the displacement on a bigger scale. But I would keep it like very traditional and just displace the wall with a modifier in Blender. Because the benefit there is that as soon as you have any of this cobblestone, any of this cobblestone texture happening in your scene, right, is that I can just copy this modifier stack onto another asset that also has that, let's say another building, and it's done, right? Like I don't need to be worried about it, and I just need to worry about like painting the areas that I want to be optimized more or less. So Vanima is asking, seems like nowadays studios pipelines go towards triangulated dirty mesh, aka brute force all tileable textures. Do you think cleanup is overwork based on nanomesh tech? Well, I think even in that case, right? Like I feel like as long as an asset doesn't need to move, like I don't care what the geometry looks like. Like because the only reason why we still do like retopology or like remeshing or all that kind of stuff is just to make it easier for like an animator to work with it, right? There have been a lot of meshes where I just use like decimation or something like that. Unfortunately, Nanite works very poorly with vertex painting. No, that got fixed. Well, not vertex painting. I think it's called mesh painting now. So they do have like a new way of working with that. So that should be done. That should be fixed, quote unquote. But yeah. In your question, what you're saying, Sovanima, do you think the cleanup is overwork based on nanomesh tech? If you're talking about it in like, are we doing too much? Are we spending too much time on like cleaning up meshes that don't need it? I think so. But also, like you have your base mesh, and then you still have, well, in a traditional sense, you have your LOD chain, or you still have, in the newer tech, you have like your nanite optimization, right? Your meshlet technology that then individually calls like all the shells out. But we can control how aggressive they are, right? So even in a traditional LOD, let's say you have a really cool cinematic prop that you want to look like kick-ass, like once you put your face into it, right? We can make like a separate LOD chain that is more for cinematic assets, and then it calls like the poly count aggressively as you go further back, right? So there's like a lot of different ways where we can optimize things or kind of make it work to the specs that we want to hit. Victoria is asking, but then the mesh still shouldn't be too heavy in poly count, right? Well, so now we're going to go into the question of what your pipeline is, right? Because from a general sense, yeah, it doesn't need to be too heavy in poly count, but it also depends on what additional things you have to support it, right? Because, for example, if you look at some of the original documentation from Nanite, the way that they were saying that it was going to be more optimized and less heavy on your memory, and specifically storage memory, right, was that they were cutting out some of the textures that you would need, right? Because the amount of density that we're now seeing was in some way meant to be a replacement for normal maps, right? As were normal maps back in the day a replacement for not being able to just slap like a bunch of polys on it, right? So yeah, they should still be optimized. But I think the term optimization is slowly meaning, it's always changing, right? But it's slowly meaning something else in the future. And we're going to optimize in different ways. Because, for example, one game might be like, hey, we're going to go lower in poly count, and then we're going to have like normal maps to help us like reconstruct some of that like finer detail, right? And then other games might be like, hey, we're going to only use tidables, and we're going to be super efficient with that, but then we're going to add some of that additional detail into the meshes instead, right? And that's like a choice of how the workflow is going to be, depending on what the needs are. Mesh painting in Unreal Engine 5 creates a new texture from what I've seen. Wouldn't that be less optimized? Yeah, it would. Well, technically, in a raw sense, if you add like a new texture, it would. Yeah, but it also depends on. I mean, it would, But then there's a bunch of follow-up questions that we need to ask, right? Like, how is that stored? How much does that actually take up of memory space? How is that packed into different textures? Because what we can do is, for example, different ways of packing textures or storing them with different like information. They have like a different effect on how costly they are to render, right? We're going into like freaking tech artist territory, right? So I'm keeping it very broad. But that means that even if, let's say, you add a new texture, it might still be more performant to add a mesh paint texture than, let's say, a traditional texture. Might be. I have no idea about this, right? But yeah. That would be an interesting one to look into, actually. I would love to just like, I don't know, make a quick mesh painting texture and then see how much that takes up into like the budget, like in memory. That would be cool to look into. Yeah. Psychomantis is oh wait, sorry. Megfal is asking, what is that modifier in Blender called, and is there something similar in Maya? Oh, the displacement? Is there something similar in Maya? Not sure actually. I know that there's something well, the same thing happens in Max, right? But I think this is a workflow where Maya is really gonna suck in because we don't have a modifier stack. And I think for this workflow that I'm saying, if you want to keep it non-destructive, you need to have a modifier stack. Because as soon as you add a displacement modifier and then you do your decimate, you end up with like a decimated mesh. And if you then want to go back to the displacement and change it with another texture, we're screwed, right? You lose all that flexibility. Right. I'm gonna be right back, run to the toilet, and then we'll talk about my preference between Maya, Max, or Blender. I think that's always an interesting one. Be right back. All right, we're back. So as a follow-up, if you want to do like the whole displacement workflow, then Houdini is probably a good option as well then. Yeah, it can be. It's in, just if you look at like your average 3D artist, Houdini is going to be the scary option, you know? It might be over-engineered, but it can. You definitely do it. I mean, let's be real, like in a production pipeline, what would happen is that this would be automated somehow, right? That if you were to, I don't know, select like a couple of presets or whatever, it can then like automate the whole thing for you, right? Because then it can look at like the surface variation and decide like, hey, this is going to be more optimized than like, I don't know, silhouette variation, something like that. Psychomantis is asking, what's the background music? It's actually linked in the description down below. It's a friend of mine, Marika Shans. She makes like beautiful music. She has her work available on Spotify as well. So that's what I'm listening to now. We used to work together at Ubisoft, and then she kind of split off to kind of do like her music thing because that was her passion. It's really cool. So yeah, give her a listen. Share the support. And let's see. Yeah, and you were asking the question: do you prefer Maya, 3ds Max, or Blender? Which one is the best for environment art? So, which one is the best for environment art? So, it's gonna be Blender. Just because, like, if you look at like all the tools that they're making, all the available stuff that is available, right? You can sculpt in Blender. You can have geonodes in Blender. You can make your own tools. You can like modeling is easy. Like, I don't know. If you just look at the suite of stuff that's available for free, we're getting to the point where it's just like, why are Max and Maya still a thing? You know, they're antiquated. Like they're really old. That doesn't mean that they don't function. You know. But like, if you look at the development progress that happened in Blender and compare that to like 3ds Max and Maya, like I don't know, it just feels so slow. It feels like Maya and Max are still like the remnants from like 90s tech. And then Blender is like, even though Blender is as old as they are, right? Blender feels like it is more innovative and adds more stuff to the table. And of course, it's free, right? Like the reason why I switched was just because it was free. And I was paying. So to give some more context, I was to give a lot of context, let's say. During uni, I used 3ds Max for 4 years, right? After that, I used Maya professionally for about 3 years. Then I used Max again for a couple of years as I was making the transition to Blender ever so slowly. And then now I'm using Blender, right? So the last company that I worked for, I used Blender with like Max sort of in between as a bridge. Before that at Ubisoft, I was using Blender as well with like Max as a bridge, right? Because most of the stuff that happens in bigger studios is that they have all their tools and all their stuff built in to whatever tool they use, right? In my cases, it was always 3ds Max. But in most cases, that doesn't matter because the only thing that they need is like an FBX to get in, and then whatever tools you can just plug into it and then just like export it, right? In most cases. Of course, if you have like more in-depth development pipelines, yeah. If you go into like more in-depth development pipelines, let's say Star Citizen, I know that for example, they it's probably likely that you will be doing like your work or inside of Max because they have like all their decal tools and all that kind of stuff built into it, right? Can you increase how much you can undo in Blender? I have no idea. I've never hit the undo limit. I have no idea. Aliasing and distortion on UV shells. Environment artists need avoiding aliasing by all means, but it's hard for an engine to do a triplanar every time. Lack of experience, a hard topic for me right now to find this golden mix. Interesting. How long did it take you to switch from Blender? I'm on Maya and I just find it difficult. Well, it didn't take me too long, honestly. The thing that I do is I do like a mini project and I don't touch anything else. So let's say I want to switch to Blender. I'm going to do like a project where I'm going to be learning all about Blender, and that's like my Blender project. I hit it all the time when sculpting in Blender. Oh, well, it's been a while since I sculpted. But you can probably like increase your undo steps for sure. But to tell you how long that it took me to switch, I think 1 or 2 weeks, I think. And that is, I made it so much more worse for myself. I think let's say like a month, because here's me switching, right? Literally 2.79. The version before 2.8 where they basically rewrote the whole thing, and that is basically what made Blender as popular as it is now, the 2.8 update. So my dumbass like came in 2.79, and the first thing that I did was like, hey, I miss pie menus, so I'm gonna code my own pie menu in Python. Then I made my whole pie menu. It was all working nicely, and then decided to update to 2.8, and I broke my pie menu, and then I never used it since. So it was kind of fucked from that point on. But yeah, I do. There's honestly something so creative about Blender. I find it difficult to explain it any other way. Yeah, it is a bit different compared to your other programs, right? Where you use the gizmo and all that kind of stuff. I stopped using the gizmo entirely. Like, I love the way that it works now without a gizmo. Like, I actually really like it. Like, just pressing G and then X and then like snapping it to an axis that way and then snapping to vertices and edges and all that kind of stuff. I don't use a gizmo anymore, which is really nice. Many studios are starting to adopt Blender as of late as well. Might as well move on. So, you know, when like people were saying like all the way back, hey, it's not industry standard yet. A lot of people were using it back then as well. But obviously they can't say it, right? Because it's like NDA, and I mean, you don't know what you can't say, right? There's a lot of NDA bullshit going on. But yeah, like the whole industry standard conversation, there were so many people that were like, well, I'm kind of using Blender, you know? But it just didn't say it. It is honestly so good. I was gonna say that when I switched, I was using Maya LT, which was like an indie version that they recently released when I started using it. And you had to pay like 300 a year or something like that, and it had stupid restrictions where you could only export up to like 20K or something like that. And it's like, oh cool, I'm making a high poly model, so now I need to split up my model into like multiple things? Like, what? But here's the thing though, with all this said, you know how much I love Blender and all that kind of stuff? It does not make sense to switch to Blender if you're already using Max or Maya, and you're comfortable with it, right? It just doesn't make sense. I would honestly, and especially if you're looking to get into the industry, right? Which I'm assuming most people are here. At that point, I would still stick with, in this case for the games, I would stick with Max, because most studios, I'm assuming, especially bigger studios, still use Max, right? So yeah. I do want to add that into the mix as well. I cannot leave my shells and pivot control from Maya. Yeah. It's hard for me to tell, because I wasn't using the pivot as much as I do now in Maya. And shelves, I mean, your shelves, you can get those back, like, easily. It depends, right? Like, you create a dependency on, like, the tools that you created. I will tell you, the first thing that I installed in Blender was, I don't even know what it's called anymore. Edit Edge Flow. Edit Edge Flow is the first thing that I installed in Blender, and I keep installing that. Like, Edit Edge Flow is like a lifesaver, and that is a Maya thing, right? It's built into Maya. But I love it. I love it in Blender. So good. The 3D cursor also has some nice techniques too for transforms. Yeah, I use the 3D cursor like once in a while when I need to. Otherwise, I kind of hate the 3D cursor, not gonna lie. The stack modifier is superb in 3ds Max, but the UV unwrapping is horrible. It's due for an update. Well, good for you, because Blender 5.0 like literally overhauled their entire UV unwrapping in the way that it works. So, yeah. Apparently, they literally just did that yesterday. That's also another thing that I want to check out as well. And the stack modifier is superb in 3ds Max. Yeah, I don't... Usually, the only thing that I hear that people miss about like the stack modifier in Max compared to Blender is the edit poly one. But that's about it. I feel like a lot of other stuff is already in Blender. And I feel like only the edit poly one, that's what people miss about it. What about speed? What about speed in hard surface? Well, that doesn't... Like, honestly, speed, it doesn't depend on the tools. It depends on the person using the tools, right? Because in general, like, I know people that were freaking magicians with Maya. Like, you would not see anything move in terms of, like, pop-ups and all that kind of stuff, and they were modeling that way. It was all muscle memory. It was amazing to see. And I know people that do the same thing in Blender as well. So that's more of like an individual skill than like a tool thing, honestly. Yeah. I think I'm halfway into learning Blender, but I'm still using Maya at the same time, which is making it a slow transition. Yeah, that's the thing. That's why whenever I do a transition like this, I just say like, hey, look, next project, I'm only going to be using this, because otherwise it just becomes like this lengthy, drawn out process where it's just like, ugh, I kind of feel like, and then you go back to Maya, and then you're using your Blender hotkeys, and then you go to Blender and you're using your Maya hotkeys, and it's just like, what the hell? Nothing's working. Yeah, it's a good question. But yeah, I do really love Blender. But also, I'm very there's a word for this where you like count your money, very stingy with money, I guess, right? And then if I compare like the tools that I get from like Max or Maya compared to Blender for free, like it's not even a comparison, right? Frugal, yes. It's probably a more polite way of saying it than me calling myself stingy. Isn't ZBrush finally receiving a UI overhaul? Yeah, but also... also, why? You know? Like, it's been like 30 years. I mean, I get why they're doing it, right? And I feel like, honestly, they have to, because now it's a subscription, you know? So they have to put in changes, and they have to put in the work, right? So, yeah. Yeah, I also don't really miss ZBrush, not gonna lie. One of my uni years, I was transitioning from Blender to Maya, and another class was asking us to use Cinema 4D as well. Oh my god, Cinema 4D for games? There's no way. That's just dumb. The ZBrush UI scares me too much to even try. I mean, that's understandable. Can you say more about parallax occlusion? Is it common in games? I never encountered it before you mentioned it. Yeah, it's very common. A lot of games use it now. Parallax occlusion mapping. It is very common in decals. So for example, if you have like damage on like the road, like that is not actually going into it physically. That's just parallax occlusion mapping, kind of faking like a hole being in the floor or something like that. It's very commonly used for that. It's also very commonly used on tileable textures, right? So that it creates like this effect of depth. Yeah. Blender sculpting seems to work fine for what I need at the moment. Yeah, I think so. I think if you're used to, if you are, let's say, a character artist and you want like all those like really cool tools that ZBrush has, there's no way that like Blender sculpting is not going to be a pain in the ass for you, right? That's just the truth about it. It has a long way to go. But for a person like myself, if I just want to sculpt like a trim sheet, or I just want to sculpt some like details, break them down really quickly, like, yeah, it's awesome for that. I love it. Right. Pokizera, let's talk about your work. You're making a Moonpool base, and then you would love to get some feedback, references, or even tutorials on how to create the water environment in the background. I can't really give you tutorials. I mean, that is honestly just looking it up on YouTube, right, and see what comes up. But from my knowledge, and take this with a grain of salt, I've never had to create like an underwater scene myself, right? But where I would start is I would usually look into fog effects, Because we want to create like this look, right? Where we get a haziness from like a certain point onwards. And we can create that with like fog or with post-processing as well. So I think those two could be solid first things to look into. It's probably going to be most likely that's going to be post-processing. And then maybe you can, I mean, in your case, it's going to be simpler, right? Like have like a post-process volume like in the water or something like that only affects that area. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, there's nothing too much more to add from my side because again, no real experience. But yeah, what is also common, and this is what you'll see a lot, is this type of stuff, right? Like on the floor. What is that called again? Chat, help me out. God. Caustics. There we go. Thank you. Caustics. So yeah, having that as like you can set that as like a light projection, right? So in your lights, what you can do is you can have a light with a light function. You can input a texture into that light function, and that will create like this kind of look, which is really cool. If you wanna see an example of this, there's a free scene called The Dark Ruins from like Quixel, which actually has like a caustic shader that they use quite a lot, and it looks really, really cool. So, and it's a free scene as well, so you might as well download it, open it up, see what it looks like. They also have a really cool like puddle shader in there as well, which is really cool to look at. But yeah, cool little start of a scene though. I like where that is going. I do wanna say water and underwater stuff is not the easiest thing, right? But it's yeah, so prepare yourself for a technical challenge on making water look really good and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, have fun. And also, welcome to the community. It's lovely to have you here. Nice to know. I will check it out. Yeah. If there's anything else for next week, feel free to tag your work back up and then we can talk about it some more. Right, next up, Darren. Darren is working on his research camp. Do you think this is an acceptable level of topology for a game-ready asset? And I tried to improve the atmosphere. Do you think it worked? So topology first. Let's have a look. So in terms of like acceptable, right? It's always hard for anyone, really. It's not only for myself to like say yes or no, because it depends on a lot of factors, right? In games, for example, it depends on the target hardware, it depends on the target graphics card. There's so many factors, right? Like how close can you get to something? Where's the camera gonna be? But yeah, usually what I will say is that it is acceptable for this one. But what I would say is what is more important is where the density is. And this is in general across all assets, right? Because what we want to focus on is that we showcase density where it's needed. So for example, we have like this really cool like cloth tent, which looks like quite nice. But then we have like these really dense little pegs and ropes and all that kind of stuff, where we don't really need that amount of density, right? So for example, like those individual ropes, they could, again, like from this distance, even just be like four-sided, or potentially even like five-sided. Usually with four-sided, you have enough geo to kind of work with. Because if you then just smooth the normals, right, it's going to give it the appearance of actually having like a rounded surface. So that's all you need, like all the way going down. And then also, you don't need like all these cuts, because nothing here is changing to the silhouette. And then from this point on, you might need like 3 of them or something like that, right? So that means that we can optimize this like a lot, right? And we're basically going to be turning that down to, I don't know, this can almost be like 10% of what it is in terms of poly count. And the reason why I mention the density, it's the consistency of the density, right? So if you have this amount of assets, this amount of polys to kind of make this look smooth, why do we then need to have like such density over here, right? So that's something to think about. Just that the density is more important than the actual raw poly count of something. Right, and then talking about the atmosphere, we're seeing some really nice improvements. A couple of things that I wanted to point out is some ground fog. That could definitely help. Usually these are like tiny volumes that you can scatter in your entire scene, and they add like a little bit of just like a nice ground fog, right, in the entire scene. Smoke, because you got some fire. It would be nice to see some like smoke kind of coming off. And then also, this is not really for like the mood, right, but like blending between assets. That would be something to look into. And then maybe even thinking about, you know, doing some additional set dressing. As in, how do we make something that just stands by itself? How do we make that look nice, right? And for that, we would need to look into real life. How does these like individual rocks look in real life? And what makes one look nicer than the other? But yeah, in terms of mood, already great improvements though, compared to the last one. It feels, you can already tell that because this is the brightest spot, all the attention is kind of going here. Right? So that's really nice. I really like that. That's a great job on that. Whoop. Sorry, just taking the music. Cool. Yeah, thank you, Darren, for sharing your work. I would say best of luck with the next updates. And then the last one for today. Oh, hey, Darren. Thank you. No worries. Eugenie is saying, I see. It's like you have something on the floor and you needed both to have water on it. We can project it on both with a parallax decal. I think I've seen something in Silent Hill. Yeah, let me give you an example. What is a good example? There's one from Star Citizen that I love to bring up. Let's see. So this is a little video from Digital Foundry. And we're going to be having a look at a specific section here. Was this one? I think it might have been the other one. Oh, it was this one, I guess. There we go. Where's a specific part that I want to talk about? Was it not in here? Oh well. Oh. Yeah, here we go. This is it. Okay, so this is the thing that I always bring up when when we're talking about parallax occlusion mapping, right? All this detail, so you can see it really clearly here. See what this is doing? What this surface is doing? That is not real. That is not geometry. That is just parallax occlusion mapping. Pushing it like in and out of the surface. And like the same thing with like all those other decals, right? The way that they push in or out of a surface, that is just like a little strip of a texture that just pushes in or out of a surface. You can kind of see like the comparison here, right? Go away. We can kind of see like this is without those decals and this is with those decals. Yeah, it's a really cool technique to kind of add that kind of detail into surfaces. And that can be done on like damaged decals on walls, on floors, on like entire walls. Like it happens a lot. Yeah. Right. Last one for today from Cool Major. Yeah. Oh, there's so much like sneaky stuff that goes into like making games. It's really cool. I love like nerding out about all this tech stuff so much. Cool. Wait, am I losing it? Oh no, there we go. Sorav. So 2 questions from Sorav is I would like to get some general feedback on the lighting. At this stage, I'm currently using a 3-point lighting setup without any post-processing. Cool. I have some things to say. So I'm gonna try to organize it from like big to small changes, right? So the first bigger change that I wanted to say is separate the object more from the background. And what I mean by that is that right now, all the values in the entire scene are relatively similar, right? Because we have like the back of this fan, for example, blends into the wall. Like I can't distinguish between the two. And then even here, it becomes like really hard to read the asset, right? So we need to do a better job of like separating the asset from the background. So for example, here I got an example from George Shaw. Just really nicely separating like the asset itself from the background, right? But it's because the lighting. So first of all, the values are going to be different, right? So the values in the foreground are brighter than the values in the background, which is sort of more difficult to tell in your case. And then also there's going to be depth of field and there's all these other things that are happening as well. But yeah, that is not really happening here yet, right? So what I would start out with is like a light that kind of focuses, like imagine like a garage light, like at the top of it, like shining down onto the asset and kind of giving us an area that we can kind of focus onto, right? That's where I would start and trying to figure that out first, how that works. For that, I actually have like a section here for like a garage light to kind of dive into that, but we'll do that in a bit. The second thing is also like the thing that you're doing here with the rim light is really cool, but you also need to do that in areas where, again, we need to separate the asset in the foreground more from the background, right? So those areas, we wanna put some like rim light in here too, so that we can clean those areas up as well. But I think definitely the first big thing is separating the object more from the background and making sure that all the attention is going to the foreground. Even if you look at, so I'm gonna give you like a little bit of inspiration here, right? So, actually, we're gonna go with like. Here we go. So, we're gonna go for a car photography studio lighting setup. Right? And in here, you can kind of already see the way that they light up their little their cars, right? Let me switch over to my main screen. So you can already see in these examples, like the way that they kind of set up their lights, right? So for example, in this case, it is meant to be looking dramatic. This in tab. It's meant to be looking dramatic. So we have this huge softbox at the top, which is casting diffuse light, right? Because what you do with a point light or a spotlight is you create like intense light. We don't really want that in most cases, right? Or you can, but that's gonna also make a point reflection on your surface as well, on your asset. So in this case, what we didn't see, we see like these like light reflecting panels, which are really cool. And even the ones in the back, right? They light up the background, but they also separate the car from the background as well. So we have a couple of interesting techniques that are kind of working together here. Obviously, not all of them can be used in the way that we want to render stuff, right? But it can still be like interesting to, for example, look at how some of these rigs are set up and how they kind of separate an element from the background, right? So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that there's like real world examples of how to set up like a lighting studio that you can translate to 3D and take some inspiration from. Because there's car light studios, there's also individual like asset studios. So if we go to like there's prop photography. Like even people taking like pictures from like plants and all that kind of stuff, right? Or even product photography. That's the thing. And we can kind of see even in these cases, right? Like the way that they kind of set up, like the lighting setups. Obviously, this is all studio lighting, right? But even in this case, you can kind of see the way that they set up the lights with like all these like caps to get like a specific reflection on the final result. That's sort of the stuff that we need to think about, right? Like what kind of light do I need to set up to highlight a specific part of this asset in a certain way? So yeah. But I would first start out with the big stuff. So I'm imagining like a big garage light, which is what we can dive into here. And we can tie that into story, right? Like the way that I would look at defining what kind of light you want is kind of leaning into the story a little bit more. Where, for example, if you imagine that this is like an old abandoned garage, then yeah, we're gonna go for like a more warm light because that is usually more nostalgic and kind of hints at like older buildings, right? So in that case, instead of having like a neutral, almost studio light setup, I would go for something that hints at more of like an older setup, right? And that can have to do with the light color, with the light intensity, and also just the setup in general. All these things can kind of hint at like the story, right? So try to find some references. Try to look up, okay, I'm imagining this in like, I don't know, a rural barn somewhere in India or something like that. What does that look like? What kind of lights do they have? Like what makes that unique compared to some other regions in the country, right? Just as an example, right? Cool, so that was question number 1. Question number 2 was, would adding colors help? Right now, no. Because you're still trying to set up the base setup, right? So if we're gonna add additional layers of complexity by adding color to it, I think unless you keep the colors like relatively simple, right? Like for example, this sort of color, if you want to go for like a story, I would go to that. But if you want to experiment with like really elaborate color setups, I would not do that because that can be very overwhelming because then we're talking about colors and their emotion and how that plays into the mood and all that kind of stuff, and that goes pretty deep. So we need to do some more research before we can do that effectively, right? Because I don't want us to go into a situation where we're just slapping on colors to make it look like nicer, but we don't know what the colors stand for or how they contribute to the scene effectively, right? So I would try to fix those problems first, like the bigger problems, right? Like separating the object more from the background, making sure that it tells a story, trying to do some more of those elements before we then add to the additional stuff where we can try to add colors into it. And in general, for any question, for any generic question that basically is asking, I'm trying to keep this general, right? So for any question that is basically asking us to imagine what it looks like, I think it's always better to try it out than to imagine. And I see this a lot, right? So this is not purely for the person here, for Cool Major getting the feedback, but also in general. Like sometimes if you don't know something, the best thing that you can do is just give it a try and see what it looks like. Right. So yeah. A bit more light here. A bit more softer light. And then see where we go from there. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. Hello, hello, Alejandro. Hello, hello. Good to see you. You're doing well. Right. We're near the end. Dun, dun, dun. So I am not gonna add like anyone else to this, because I do actually wanna get back into some more work in just a little bit. So for the people that missed the deadline, I'll add you next week to the list. And then hopefully someone else, or maybe if I find some time like in between things this week, I can add in some additional comments. But we'll see. Yeah. Yeah. I think we'll keep it as is. Because yeah, I do want to do some more editing, get some more videos online, get all that stuff sorted out. So I'm gonna leave it here, everyone. Thank you so much for your support. If you haven't subscribed yet, that would be really appreciated. And also share with your mom and your dog, you know, like who knows, maybe they need some help with their art too. Anyway, it's been a pleasure to have you here, and we'll see each other on Sunday, because Sunday is the big finale for the team challenges. So it's gonna be about like two hours back from now. So feel free to be there. It's gonna be cool. We're gonna be going through like all the final results. I will be setting up a reminder and like a live stream message for that, so that you can stay up to date with the timing. But yeah, I would hope to see you all there, because it's gonna be freaking awesome. Like I can't wait to show off like all the hard work of all the teams that have been working for 5 weeks tirelessly to get all these amazing projects done. It's gonna be really, really cool. Psychomantis is saying my dog said woof. Oh shit, thanks man. Like say woof back, you know? What about your landlord? Yeah, I don't know. The landlords will be fine. You know, they don't need 3D advice. They're fine. All right, I'm gonna be heading out. I wish you all a nice evening, and I'll see you all on Sunday then. Bye bye, and have a good evening.